During the Liang dynasty, when the Great Wall of China rested upon the mountains like a slumbering dragon, the empire fell victim to a strange illness. This was not a plague or a famine. It was a sickness that consumed the soul, a malady known as the silent sorrow. It all began in the capital, the city of Jing'an, which meant eternal peace. First, the colors started to fade. Ruby silk robes turned the color of dried wine. The imperial gardens, with their vibrant pink peach blossoms, seemed to breathe under a layer of gray dust. Then the sounds changed. The laughter of children in the alleys was no longer ringing, but short and broken. The vibrant cries of merchants in the silk market turned into weary whispers. People no longer told each other stories. It was as if an invisible thread connecting their hearts had been severed, and everyone had withdrawn into the heavy silence of their own being. Emperor Wen, a wise and kind ruler, watched in despair as his empire withered. He summoned the finest physicians, but they found no fever or disease in the people's bodies. He turned to the sages and philosophers. They debated for days about qi, the vital life force, and its imbalance in the land, but they offered no solution. The silent sorrow, like a cold fog, was devouring everything. In the depths of his desperation, the emperor remembered an ancient legend, the zither of echoing souls. A zither, an ancient instrument similar to a lap harp, was said to be crafted from the wood of a moon tree and kept in the deepest vault of the palace. The legend told that its melody could restore the lost harmony between heaven and earth, but for 1,000 years no one had been worthy of playing it. Emperor Wen issued a decree that spread throughout the realm. Any musician who can dispel the silent sorrow from my land with the music of the zither of echoing souls shall be appointed to the position of first musician of the court, and their name shall be immortalized. This decree breathed new hope into the people's hearts. Hundreds of musicians flocked to the capital. The first to be given the chance was Master Jin. He was the most famous musician of his time, a man whose fingers danced across the strings with unbelievable speed. He sat proudly before the zither and played a complex and dazzling piece. The notes flowed through the hall like a cascade of diamonds. Everyone was amazed by his flawless technique, but his music was cold and soulless, like a perfect painting with no emotion. When his music ended, the silence in the hall was heavier than before. The silent sorrow had not stirred one bit. The second was a lady named May from the southern provinces, renowned for playing heartbreaking melodies. With a heart broken by the sight of the people's sorrow, she began to play. The zither's melody told the story of all regrets and losses. Tears streamed down the faces of the emperor and his courtiers. Her music did not deny the sorrow. Rather, it embraced it and cried it out loud. But this was like pouring salt water on a wound. It deepened the people's sorrow because it reminded them just how sad they were. Lady May also failed. After weeks of fruitless trials, the emperor's hope was beginning to fade. Meanwhile, in a small, remote village, lived a man named Li Wei. He was not a musician. He was an instrument repairman and tuner, a simple man who had spent his entire life listening to the voices of wood and string. He used to say, "Every instrument has a soul. My job is to bring joy to its soul." Li Wei felt the silent sorrow in his own village. He heard it in the sound of the cracking wood of the houses and in the silence between his neighbors' words. Upon hearing the emperor's decree, he embarked on a long journey to the capital, not for fame, but to help his people. When he arrived at the palace in his simple clothes and with his calloused hands, He was ridiculed by the other musicians. But the Grand Vizier, an old and worldly man, saw something different in Li Wei's calm eyes and allowed him to try. Li Wei entered the great hall. He approached the legendary zither, but unlike the others, he did not immediately begin to play. He knelt beside the instrument and closed his eyes. For a long minute, he just listened. Not to the silence of the hall, but to the silence of the instrument itself. Then, he did something strange. He took his small tools out of his cloth bag. With incredible delicacy, he tightened one of the strings slightly. Then he loosened another by the barest breath. He gently ran his fingers over the ancient wood of the instrument, as if stroking the cheek of an old friend. He wasn't playing any notes. He was simply tuning the instrument. Master Jin scoffed loudly. This fool is mad. He intends to cure silence with silence. Li Wei, ignoring the others, continued his work. He had understood that the problem was not with the musicians or the people. The problem was with the zither itself. Over the centuries, the legendary instrument had absorbed all the unspoken sorrows of the land. The instrument's soul had become sick and out of tune from the sheer weight of grief. Every note that came from it was an echo of that same sorrow. After about an hour, Li Wei put his tools aside. He sat cross-legged before the zither. Everyone held their breath, waiting for a magical melody. But Li Wei held his fingers a few inches above the strings and did nothing. He just sat there in silence. But this silence was different from the silence before. It was a full silence, one that emanated from a tuned and peaceful instrument, creating a space for sound to be heard. Suddenly, something happened. First, one of the silk curtains in the hall rustled in a gentle breeze, and its soft sound was heard like a musical note in the vast silence. Then, the sound of the Emperor's steady breathing became audible. Then, the sound of their own heartbeats. This silence forced people to listen to the small, living sounds around them, sounds that had been lost in the clamor of their sorrow. Li Wei's silence was not a void. It was a blank canvas that allowed the world to paint itself upon it once more. A few moments later, from outside the hall, came the faint sound of a child's laugh, a sound that was ringing and real. It was as if the spell had been broken. A golden light streamed in through a window, and the colors came to life again. The silent sorrow had been vanquished, not by a complex melody, but by a healing silence. Emperor, Wen rose from his throne and approached Li Wei. "What did you do?" "You played no notes," Li Wei replied respectfully. "Your Majesty, the silent sorrow was not a void that needed to be filled with music. It was a tension, like a string, pulled too tight. I simply released that tension. Sometimes, to hear the music of life again, one does not need to play. One only needs to create the space for it to be heard." Conclusion. This story teaches us that when facing profound problems, the solution does not always lie in doing something great or adding something new. Sometimes, the most powerful actions are to listen, to create space, and to tune what already exists. By understanding the root of the problem, the instrument, with a sick soul, instead of focusing on its symptoms, the people, as Li Wei, arrived at a solution that no one else could see. This tale reminds us that silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes, the deepest healing and the most beautiful music are found in a silence that has been perfectly tuned.